Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Endemic Birds of Sri Lanka webinar. This is the fifth online lecture that we, the Wildlife Society of St. Thomas's College, Mount Lavinia, have conducted so far. The goal of these online webinars are to raise awareness among the public on Sri Lanka's unique flora and fauna, as we believe that awareness is a vital key to conservation. For those of you who don't know, the Wildlife Society of St. Thomas's College, Mount Lavinia is one of the oldest natural history societies in the country, being founded in 1884. Our society has empowered many great naturalists, scientists, and conservationists for 136 years. Today, we are extremely honored and delighted to present to you Dr. Sampath Semirata. For those of you who don't know him, Dr. Sampath is a senior lecturer of zoology at the University of Colombo and an evolutionary biologist specializing in ornithology, molecular ecology, and evolutionary genetics. He founded the lab Avian Evolution Knot, which aims on studying faunal evolution through genetic isolation in an island biography framework using both field and laboratory skills. His work spans across the globe, from studies on seabirds in the Arctic pole to rainforest endemics in Sri Lanka and the Western Ghats. His immense contribution towards the field of ornithology has revolutionized our understanding on Sri Lankan birds. The discovery of the red-backed flameback and the Hanuman Clover are a few of his many notable findings. The Hanuman Clover, which was recently discovered by a team of scientists led by Dr. Sampath, brought much attention as it is the latest bird to be discovered from our island nation. We would now like to sincerely thank Jeep and Demo Sri Lanka for sponsoring this webinar. We are ever grateful for their generous contribution to make these online lectures possible. I would also like to thank the ICT Society of St. Thomas's College, Mount Lavinia for work tirelessly this last week to live stream this event on YouTube. If you have any questions that you wish to get answered by Dr. Sampath regarding the topic, please send them in the chat to Jonathan Bulat-Singhela, who is a co-host. And if you are watching off YouTube live, please send your questions through the comment section. Without a further ado, I would like to hand it over to Dr. Sampath. Doctor.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the generous introduction. And I think I'll remove this. Yeah, so I guess you guys can hear me and see me okay, right?
Yes, sir, it's fine.
All right, great. I have a bit of okay. So yeah, right away. Thank you very much again for the Wildlife Society of St. Thomas's for the invitation. It's a pleasure. It's an honor, and I'm a parent of St. Thomas's, so it's even special. I spend a little bit more time than a usual presentation, simply because of you, and talking to your generation is actually probably the solution for most of the chaos, kind of lack of awareness, lack of understanding, and a lack of interest that we see in our society. And that lack of understanding and awareness, and also the lack of interest to our nature and our environment, I think hinder our journey towards progression, towards making a better nation, a better community, because like in any household, right? If your environment, if your garden, if your living room is messy and polluted and dirty and stinky, and lack of life, then no good. The environment won't be of the household won't be friendly, easy, and people would be in stress. So the same things that we see every day nowadays in the society, in the roads, in the workplaces, at school, where bad things like drugs to violence to lawlessness, from all corners of the society, partly comes from the deterioration of our environment. So talking to you is, I considered partly an honor and also a duty, and also as a parent, the way forward, and as a educator and a scientist, the best time spent. Okay, with that, I will right away go to my slides just so that, oops, so I could right away start. Okay, give me a second. All right, guys. I will make it full screen. All right, and I'll remove the controls. I'm just hide floating meeting controls. Okay, I think I can. I'm visible, and you guys can. Everybody can hear me. Okay, right?
Yes, sir.
You guys can hear me. Okay, right?
Yes, sir, we
Yeah,
And
can.
you can see. You can see my screen as well.
yeah.
All right, great. Thank you. All right, so I will again hide my float. Yeah, right. So this is about, yes, it's about our endemics. Yes, it's about, I can't, why I can't hide this, give me a second. Hey, you know what, guys, if you can remove me as a host, it would be easier because it things pop up every second. Okay, that's okay. If you can't hide remove me from the host, that's okay. If you can just remove me from as a host because co-host, so because there's all the kind of notifications come into my screen as well. All right, with that, let's start. Keep this at the sidebar. All right, so this is about our endemics. It's about not just about endemics, it's about our past, our identity, and the beauty of it. So I try to, the Wildlife Society, students of the society asked me to add a little bit kind of elements of evolution into it as well. So I will start from the causes of endemism, and then I will move into the consequence of endemism, and then I will show some of the beauty of it. And as I mentioned earlier, it is not about birds, it's not about their colors, it's not about their beautiful songs, it's not about them, it's about us. Because without them, without the environment, without the trees, without the plants, without the life that's sustained by forests and trees and plants, and the life, the birds, the butterflies, the mammals, the snakes, the insects, the honeybees, the small earthworms to very large blue whales. Life won't be in this planet, and we are part of that. So if we were to live in this planet, we need to maintain the life in this planet, and there are the mechanics that sustain it. So it's about us in a way. So you don't have to be a naturalist, you don't have to be a bird watcher, you don't have to be a birder to enjoy or to appreciate the planet's life or our country's life. If you don't do that, you would not, we as a community, we as a nation, we as a society won't have a future. So it's about our millions of years of past, it's about our identity, and it's about our beauty in this planet. With that, Ane, Jonathan, if you can remove me as a host, it will be easier.
So let me try, sir, because if we do that, you might not be able to share your screen.
No, what you can do, make me make that multiple host in the share, new share, that green arrow.
Okay.
If you hit the side thing, right side to that arrow, there's a thing called multiple sharing for multiple users. I think that will make it. But I
Okay,
mean,
sir.
if not, don't worry.
So give me a
Just
minute,
try that.
I will work on that, sir. Give me a minute.
Sure,
So you
sure. Yeah.
can start.
No issue. If you can, that will be nice.
Okay.
Okay, so let's start. Yeah, let's go on a short trip back to our past. And the reason that I'm stopping every minute, what I'll do, Jonathan, I'll stop sharing for a second, and you guys.
Hello?
Okay. All right.
Sir, give a
Okay,
moment,
I
sir.
think-
Give a minute. I will quickly do this, sir. Give me a second.
Yeah, I know. I'll stop sharing, so that way it would be easier, I think, for you. Oh no, it's already stopped, is it? I'll stop sharing for a second, and you guys can remove me as a host, and then give me access to share. That's a multiple host can share kind of a thing. I'll let you know exactly. Multiple participants can share. That's
Okay, sir. Wait,
you know
I
what?
will do that.
I already done that. As a host, I've already done that. So just remove me as a host, you'll be fine.
Okay, sir. So there, it will be done, sir.
Yeah.
So I think now you've been removed. Now you can.
Great. Thank you. All right. Yes, and I can see my slides. Yeah. So then the unwanted. Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that. And but I mean it's we all, I mean, we get benefited from these online platforms, and some of these have some. All right. Great. So I removed this. Now I don't. I can see the screen. The problem was that because of this popping up messages, whenever somebody try to log in, it blocks my screen, and I just read the slide basically. So, all right, let's go on a short trip back to our past. For some, it's a very long time ago. If you know the geological history of this planet, it is a small short trip. It's like, if you know the geological history, it's like going to your nearby shop. If you don't know the geological history of this planet, if you think the life starts like 100 years or 1,000 years or 10,000 years ago, or a little bit longer, then it's a very long trip, because we are talking about millions of years. Actually, 200 million years ago. This is the Gondwana land, the place where I'll get my laser pointer. So this is where we are. We are at the south. This red dot is where Sri Lanka was 200 million years ago, and this large land is called the Gondwana land. The Gondwana land had the Africa, the South Americas here, the Middle East here, India marked here, and Sri Lanka here where the dot is. And this large land piece, the piece of this land, is the Antarctica. And you can see the Australia in the side. So we were kind of touching from our west, the African coast, from our south and majority of east, the Antarctica, and from our northeast, India, and from our north, Madagascar. So we were in the sandwich between Antarctica, Madagascar, Africa, and India. And this is how it looks like. This is an artist description, but it's based on fossil evidence. There were dinosaurs and larger, relatively advanced dinosaurs, and large, tall trees. And there were very large dinosaurs. And I'm not saying that this is the dinosaur that lived in Sri Lanka, but we were part of this Gondwana land, and these were the organisms lived in that Gondwana land. Why we don't see dinosaurs? Partly we don't go and look for them, and partly tropical environment doesn't support that much preservation or retention of these. But if we really go and if we really explore, we will find. So old Jurassic forest of Gondwana land about 200 million years ago is a rich place, a diverse place, and even though, and we were in the Antarctic. We were in the basically in the Antarctic Circle, near the South Pole, kind of kissing basically the continent of Antarctica. And there were larger predators later, about 150 million years ago. the very sophisticated predators like the Tyrannosaur or Albertosaur type large carnivores, evolved and thrive, and a whole assortment of larger predators, larger reptiles, we call them dinosaurs, roamed across the lands of Gondwana land. And from the smaller, more agile, like modern day geckos type organisms, or more like a long-legged land monitor, Talagoya type long-legged animals. Or if you go into the rainforest of Sri Lanka, you will see these agamid lizards, a lizard called the kangaroo lizard. It has a long legs and it can run very fast. So slightly bigger, but some things like that, like slender insectivorous dinosaurs, started to develop feathers. And these feathers had multiple uses. Some suggest that they were endothermic, or they, like us, they have a stable high body temperature. Because modern day reptiles don't have a stable body temperature, they fluctuate with the environment. But these guys had long, like a body temperature, higher body temperature, like birds and modern day birds and modern day like mammals, us. And then and they might be used as display organs as well as insect capturing apparatus, because by raising their hands with feathers, they could kind of shovel insects onto their mouth or catch them. And then some small forms eventually started to glide, and very sophisticated gliding or flying. We don't know exactly what they've done, but like this sort of four-winged feathered dinosaurs were. They are the fossils, thousands of fossils of this sort of animals found in northwestern China in recent decade. And they had long tails but feathers. This is more like the dragons of the Avatar, where there's like four wings, sophisticated gliders or flyers. And at one point in time, about 100 million years ago, there were dinosaurs, and some of the dinosaurs were theropods. And from theropods came the Velociraptor type, very aggressive, sophisticated land predators. And even Velociraptor have had the feathers, feather coating, probably not to fly, but to maintain the body temperature. So the Velociraptor fossils that found in China actually have feathers, tracings of feathers. So Velociraptor of the Jurassic Park actually had feathers. So the feathers is a dinosaur thing. And then some of the dinosaurs moved even further and went into the sky, and they managed to escape the great extinction in 65 million years ago, and still you can see them. And while this all happening, about 200 million to about 100 million, we were on a journey. We mean Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka started, as I mentioned here, in the tip of India, kissing Antarctica. Over here in this illustration, you can see in Sri Lanka as a separate island. It was a separate island for most part of its journey. And then about 150 million years, the India, Madagascar, and Sri Lanka started to move northeast. And in Australia started to move east. Africa started to move north. And then about 50 million years ago, India and Sri Lanka, and India, we got separated from Madagascar and Africa, and now we were heading towards the larger landmass of Laurasia, the northern large landmass. So we were separated. The Gondwana land basically split into South America, Africa, India, Australia, and Antarctica. And then the India and Sri Lanka as a plate moved north, and about 35 million years ago met the Laurasian great continent of the north. And this took about 150 million years. And in the process, we moved from being a Antarctic island to a tropical island. Probably the longest movement of a one country of the known past of this planet. So, so together, India and Sri Lanka, we moved a lot. And has been an island. We were an island for most part of that journey as well. And in the process, formed a Himalayan range about 35 million years ago. The Indian plate hit the Laurasian great northern continent, and eventually formed the impact formed the Himalaya. So Himalaya is still growing, still this push is happening, and India try to move further into Asian mainland. And this is what we are now. The beautiful green island in the northern Indian Ocean. South of us, it's a great Indian Ocean, no land. And if you go south, as you could go, eventually we'll meet the close neighbor once upon a time, the continent of Antarctica. But we are distant now, but still we are neighbors, because south of us, that's what we have after a long trip through the ocean. And then north, we have India, and then a little bit further north, if you looked, you can see the great Himalayan range, towering Himalaya looking at us, and we can see them. And this is our identity, our past. And this is our mountains. One of the very pretty photos of Mr. Mendes Wickramasinghe. This is the mountains of Central Highlands of Sri Lanka. And these mountains are actually very old. They are older, much older than the Himalayas. Because these are 100 million or more older, probably 200 million year old Gondwanan mountains. And there you have the old, Gondwanan relatives like this agamid, this lizard, and also some elements from the Laurasia, the northern great continent, like this rhododendron. So if you go to Horton Plains, you can see rhododendron, which is coming from Laurasia, from the north, colonized in Sri Lanka. Later, after we met the Laurasia in about 50 to 35 million years ago, and we have the elements of Gondwana land, the southern great continent, in our soil, in our trees, in our animals like these lizards, in the mountains. So if you go to Singaraja, the dipterocarps, the horror trees are Gondwanan. And then some of the, the birds and some of the, elements are Laurasian. So Sri Lanka is a unique place where the elements of the great northern continent and the great southern continent are kept in one place. That contributes to the identity of us. And in this particular talk, I will be focusing on the avifauna, the birds, and these are some of the avifauna that you might see in these mountains, but I'm not talking just simply these mountains. This is the southern rainforest of Sri Lanka. This is the cloud forest in the mountains. And these elements, some of them are exclusively found in the high-end mountains like this Aranga or the Ceylon bush wobbler. But then some elements like the ash-headed babbler and the Ceylon blue magpie can be found in wet zone in both higher and lower elevation forest. I'll talk about them. Before that, the main topic is the endemics. An animal or plant form restricted to a single political or geographical entity, such as a country, is called an endemic animal. An animal only found in that particular geographical or political area in the planet, so nowhere else you can see. So the birds that are endemic to Sri Lanka are found only in Sri Lanka, nowhere else in the world. And this is an example of a grey hornbill. I will talk about it later. It's actually the Osiris means a long beak thing. Gingalens is from the ginganger. Ginga is the ginganger. So this bird was first described by the Western sciences as a long-beaked bird from Ginganga. And Ginganga is located in the southern Sri Lanka. It starts somewhere in the Karnelia range and flows through, Karnelia, Kottava, and then from Gintota of south, it goes to the ocean. So this bird was found in described in from that area in 1700s, about 300 years ago, for the Western science. So anyway, so I will talk about few of these as we go. Right. One special thing about Sri Lanka is that we have about 500 species of birds. This the font size is a proportion to the size of the number. So India has the highest, the most diverse avifauna in our region, and then Nepal has a good diversity, then followed by Pakistan and Bhutan and so on. Our diversity is low. Why? We are an island. We are an isolated island. I will talk about it in a minute. But we have very high endemicity. Yes, India do have their number of ecosystems, and their diversity is higher. Because of that, they carry higher number of endemics. But the proportion to the total number of species to endemics, which is we call endemicity, we are far superior than any other country in the region. And then the burning question. In any of these talks, people ask how many endemics we have. And then my son yesterday asked, why these guns? The guns is that birding, once upon a time, is done in mainly using the ear and the gun. What you do that, you look around, you walk, or you are on horseback, or whatever, however you are, on a canoe or on a ship. And if you see a bird, you shoot. And then you study it. And then with the development of advanced optics, it started to shift to a more of a less invasive, more kind of a thing that you watch and study. So by mid last century, the gun started to replace from the binoculars and telescopes later in the 80s. And then in 90s and in the beginning of this century, it's basically mostly got replaced by digital cameras. So it's a changing thing. Like the medium of birding has been changing. So if you looked at some of the greats in the past, they were bloody hunters. Some people would say. But the thing is that those are the norms of those days, and so the birding is mostly done through a gun in those times. And the numbers of total species recorded from Sri Lanka to endemics had changed a lot. The total species has a gradual increase, and we are right now somewhere 500. Delho et al. is a world checklist run by BirdLife International and this group in Spain, and many others follow that nomenclature and the checklist. And in there, it's not 495. In our, we can say about 500 species, and there it's 33 or 34. It's again questionable. Part of this question. And then you can see that in Vincent Lake, probably the greatest ornithologist live in Sri Lanka. He's a military officer, and he spent 8 years in Sri Lanka, and he collected 371 species. And in his records, he claimed 47 endemics. And then it been dropped by weight, another survey done by the National Museum of Sri Lanka, then Ceylon in 1920s, 20s. And Whistler continued this study, and then Whistler got anyway. So they got about 20 to 21 endemics, and then it was the kind of the subsequent authors. Basically, the thing is that the reason that I highlighted this in white is that these studies are the true studies. The subsequent writers basically use the information from those previous ones, and then that was there till 2005, where Pamela Rasmussen, a scientist from Michigan, extensively studied the South Indian or South Asian avifauna using museum skins mostly, and they came up with this new number 33, and then Pamela is more of a she's very sharp, and she's a taxonomist, and she studied the morphology. The weightage goes to morphology, and vocalization is very high. And then comes the new molecular techniques that will add new species into the mix. So the 33 is a really believable number, but it will change. I personally think as an ornithologist that 47 would be where we are heading, because most of the things that Leg had shown seems like very, very, very interesting and meaningful. Let's see how this is happening. So I will add, this is for the wildlife community of St. Thomas's. I just add a kind of a small homemade animation to show how these endemic birds evolve. So for that you need an ancestor. I call this a phyllo. This phyllo is an ancestral kind of a generalist, and from that two species can evolve. For that you need it's called, this process is called broadly the evolution, but within evolution it's called speciation, the formation or the process of formation of species, and it takes millions of years, and it needs a flow of genes and evolutionary selection. I'll show you how it is happening. And this is a hypothetical animal, or it can be even a plant, but it lives in two environments. One is this town city type environment. This is a hypothetical animal, okay? And another population, these are population or a group of animals live in more closer to the forest. And the flow of genes actually bind in these two populations. How genes can flow through marriage or through reproduction, and individuals from this population would reproduce with individuals of this population, and the genes will bind them together as one species. This is one species, but the environment try to push these individuals to the requirements or the demands of that environment, and this environment will push these individuals towards the demands of this environment. But through flow of genes or reproduction, they remain to be one single species. So these few individuals and these few individuals are two different populations of one species. But if there's a barrier, like a mountain range or a river, or if it become an island, this flow of genes started to be flowing more within the population while they are happening between, and eventually over time, because of this barrier, in most cases a physical barrier like an ocean or a river or a mountain range, or like a serious population of predators that might basically kill anything that try to cross this gap, would prevent flow of genes between populations, and it'll basically hinder the connector, which is the flow of genes between populations. So then what happened? The evolutionary selection or the pressures of the environment will push these individuals further into the requirements of, in this example, the city, and here the requirements of the bush or the forest, and that will make them locally adapted, locally specialized to the conditions of that particular environment. So in this particular example, there's the super towny dude to the bush or the whatever the wildlife dudes evolved in the process, because now because there's no connection between them, the requirements of the environment basically push and win and make them more specialized to the environment in these respective environments. And then with that comes, so these now they can't recognize each other. These guys look different, different ornaments, different behavioral patterns, probably different accent or dialect will emerge. And these ones would have, these are this species in this side would have a more greener, more different behavioral patterns, different accent, different, ornaments, like value systems started to evolve. So they won't recognize each other as the members of the same species. With that, hinder the reproduction or the marriages or flow of genes. And even without the barrier now, they won't recognize them as the same members of the same species. And that is called the speciation. With this, when this process is over, you have now two species emerge from one common species. And this is how a species would evolve on this planet. And there were so many, and in birds, there's about 11,000 such instances had taken place, and we have about 11,000 species of birds. And the primary reasons for that, one, because of the ocean between Sri Lanka and India, which isolates birds here and act like that mountain in the middle of that two species. In this case, the Pork Strait act like that. And then the mountains of Sri Lanka, the elevation act like a barrier, like the mountain in the previous cartoon. And the climate, the wet zone and the dry climate in the dry zone act as a barrier between the dry and wet zones, and so on. And those were the main barriers to flow of genes: the climate, the elevation, and then the being an island. And then the local adaptations, like the wet conditions to the animals in the wet zone are more adapted to wet situations. Animals in the dry zone might be more adapted to the dry situations. Animals living in the arid zone might have more desert-like adaptations, and so on. And that is the process of endemism. All right, that's the end of the theory. I spent about half an hour. I'll have another half an hour to talk about the beauty and resulting that all these events, the barriers, our past of 150 million years. Okay, let's forget that and walk into our Gondwanan forest. When you walk into Kottava, when you walk into Kanneliya, when you walk into Dumbagaskanda, Horana, forest in Horana, forest in Singaraja, in the mountains, Horton Plains, Pidrutalagala, the great forest that we clear for chili plantations, the great forest we clear for potatoes, the great forest we clear for all kinds of excuses are actually millions and millions, actually over 100 to 200 million year old forest, full of life from south and north. Let's walk in the sense to see some endemics. Like this is a forested trail in the main forested trail of Kudava in Singaraja, and this is our national bird. It's a very pretty bird. The male is prettier with lots of colors, and this is the jungle fowl, Walikukula. And these maps are not the actual distribution maps that I'm showing. I'm showing these maps created by one of my former graduate student, Janaka Pereira, who created these heat maps. These are niche model based on the requirements of the species. He generated where these birds can be found in Sri Lanka. So for example, jungle fowl found on basically in all provinces of the island, but these green patches are the hotspots, the most favorable places for the species based on his predictions. And also the brown spots are the mostly the places that the species found, but the empty areas means that the conditions are not that basic environmental conditions that he added to his model is indicating that it is not the most favorable areas for the species. But it doesn't mean that they are not there. Sometimes they might be there. They can get extirpated from the areas of its preferred habitats. So it might not be there, but I'll use those maps because it adds some other flavor to it. The female is more earthy in color because it has to guard its eggs and nest and has to look after the chicks. The male contributes a little bit, but the female takes the greater lead, greater role in terms of maintaining the family. So for that, she needs to have the camouflage as a weapon to protect or cover to protect her brood. So that's why she looks more earthier in color, but lots of pretty colors. I'll show you in the next slide. This is colorful, but this has more complex colors. See, this is Spur Fowl, Sri Lanka Spur Fowl or Valikukula. You can see the browns. These are the same kind of patterns that you see in the female jungle fowl as well. It's very complicated. Each feather contains a lot of color, all shades of brown and black and white. In this case, this is the male spur fowl in both cases. To me, it's probably one of the most prettiest birds in the country. And also we've done the evolutionary distinctiveness, another separate index. And the Sri Lanka spur fowl is one of the most evolutionarily distinct endemic birds in the country. It has a very nice vocalization. If you go to Kanneliya or Singaraja, they are calling all the time, especially in the afternoon and early morning. By the way, I have to let you know that, I'm talking about 33 to 34 endemics, but each endemic is a story itself. So I can have a presentation, 1 hour presentation for each one of these 34 endemics, because each one has its own story. But what I'll do, I will use some of them. I won't talk about all 34 or whatever the number that I think I think 34 is where we are. And there's no governing principle to see. The principle is evolution, and the principle is the principle that I showed. But what is the correct number, whether 30 or 33 or 34 or 35? There's no real authority to say that this is what it is. But we normally use the BirdLife International and Delho guide as a guide for us to inform the number of endemics, and that it says now 34. And then I'm using some of the examples of these 34 species to tell my story in this particular context, our past, its identity and its beauty. So I will be using, like, for example, in this particular slide, the pigeons, the 2 endemics, the Columba torringtoni, the wood pigeon. It's a montane species. It's primarily found in the mountains. Very pretty bird, large pigeon, closely related to the paravia, the rock pigeon or the domestic pigeon. And it sounds like that as well. But sometimes it comes to even to Colombo. And it comes to, especially during the rainy, cold, rainy periods of the mountains in December, November, December, January. It comes to the southern, the lower elevations to avoid the miserable wet conditions, in cold, wet conditions of the mountains. You can sometimes see them in Colombo as well. They were there a few years ago in Deosaru Park as well. And then the Ceylon green pigeon, which is an endemic of across the country. You can see them across in all climatic and elevational zones. And the male has this purple back and female has a green back. It's a common bird with a very nice whistle. Parrots. These are the endemic parrots. We have the very pretty garden, common garden bird, Ceylon lorikeet. If you have, it's more like these Australian parrots that sometimes on sale, like smaller budgie bird type parrots. So these guys are kind of relatives of the smaller versions of parrots, very small, about size of a sparrow. Very colorful. The male has this red forehead, and it makes a kind of funny, kind of a non-parrot-like call. If you haven't seen this one in Colombo, that means you are not a birder. If you wanted to see it, if you haven't seen it, and if you wanted to see it, locate a kitul palm tree near you, or a good fruiting tree, like a good waraka tree or fruiting mango tree, and go there and scan for the fruits, especially in the canopy, and eventually you'll see a green small thing about size of a sparrow, very vocal, very fast. If you don't have a pair of binoculars or a camera, you might not even notice it. But if you capture it, like what Modita done in this particular image, you'll see something like this, stealing in this case, stealing the pera fruit from somebody's garden, I guess, and they drink the juice. It's a very pretty bird, and like slightly bigger version of it, the Layard's parakeet, is found in like places like Singharaja. It's called signaling Alugirawa, but it's more like a bluish gray with a very nice bird, very fast again, vocal, prettier than our Malagirawa of the town. And then the grey hornbill is another endemic that can be found across Sri Lanka in both dry zone, wet zone, and mountains. The female has this plain kind of ivory colored beak, and the female, this is the male, the female has this black border. And this one probably an old female. You can see the kind of serrated teeth like a beak, even though they have this strong, very sharp beak that can cause painful bites. They are berry eaters. They mostly like to eat small berries, and they are quite tame. If you don't harm them, they'll be very friendly. And you can see them in Horana, Padukka area in Colombo district, and then Labugama Kalatuava in the western province. You'll see them. They are not that rare when they are there, but they need like a lot of fruits because they eat fruits. They love waraka. They love small berries. And as I mentioned earlier, they were the gingalens. The scientific name actually refers to the gingaga. Osiris is a long-beaked. It's a kind of a deity that has a longer kind of a nose or a beak. Among the endemics, one of the most charismatic birds is the red-faced malkuha. It's a very ancient-looking animal. Doesn't call. It has a very weak, small kind of a call, but doesn't call much. It is more like a reptile rather than walking on the branches rather than flying around. But the interesting thing about this particular bird, its closest relatives are found in the Himalayan range. So it is a kind of a relic. And it found around it doesn't found in the, really lowland forest. And it found both in dry zone and wet zone in like a ring. It doesn't found in the mountains. So it likes this intermediate kind of elevation around Sri Lankan Central Highlands. Another interesting thing about this particular bird, there is an illustration of a red-faced malkuha in Kotte temple. As part of its murals in the temple, there is a relatively clear illustration of like malkuha with a red face. So the question is how the artist knew that had he seen this malkuha in the vicinities of Kotte temple when he was drawing that, or was he travel or coming from some areas where the malkuha is a common species? Had he eaten it? How he knows that? So it's an interesting thing. So, but the thing is that some of the endemics that are now restricted to Singharaja and very exotic places were found even in Kotte, like Crested Rango. And so our clearing of forest and unplanned urbanization might have wiped these pretty things from Colombo. Still in the Colombo district, there's a good variety of species endemics found in if you go towards Padukka for an area. Green-billed kukal is one species still you can see in Colombo district. It's Chlororhynchus is the chloro means green colored kind of long-beaked bird, and unlike the common Aticukula, or the southern greater kukal, this has a much bigger beak with a distinctly green colored beak. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it's a evolutionary distinct, one of the 10 evolutionary distinct species in the country, and also it's a second ranked edge species. Edge species are the species in the edge of extinction, evolutionary distinct lineages on the edge of extinction. So this particular bird represent an evolutionary lineage that is endangered, the lineage, not the species, and also has a distinctive evolutionary elements. So this is, evolutionary speaking, very important bird because it is the second ranked edge species in Sri Lanka among the list, and also one of the most evolutionary distinct endemics. Of that list, the Serendip scope owl, relatively recently discovered owl from Morapitia Runakanda area, and Singaraja and the wet zone, mid elevation wet zone, ranked the highest edge species, highest ranked edge species, which is that means that it represents a lineage that is endangered and carries a distinctive evolutionary elements. These are like, so it's a very pretty, this is Rajiv's classic mature Serendip scope owls, and a similar another endemic owl. These were the only two endemics of in this nocturnal owl group. It's also endangered, the chestnut backed owlet, and it is also an evolutionary distinct group. Both of these species found in the wet zone only. Serendip scope owl has a much more restrictive habitat because range because of its very unique needs in thick brush. It needs thick brush in the rainforest. Probably the prettiest of our endemics, an iconic species from Sri Lanka, because this one's closest relatives found in the eastern foothills of Himalayas, and it's a very pretty crow. It's a crow. Their close relatives are crows. So this is basically a super colorful crow with black stripe on dark blue, and then the light blue wash, and then the reddish brown beak. In good light, this is more like red, and the blue is so contrasting, and it has a very pretty vocalization, colors, behaviors. Once upon a time, Chaminda Ratnayaka, a graduate student from University of Colombo, done an extensive study for his PhD in Singaraja, one of the most studied, most well-studied species, thanks to Chaminda Ratnayaka's work for his PhD on the ecology of this species. So you can see them as part of his study. He ringed these birds and studied their mating behavior, studied their nest building, studied their use of the forest in Singaraja. And thanks to Chaminda's work, this is probably one of the most studied endemics of the country. Unfortunately, most of these birds were not studied well. Even though there are lots of birders, very few people who actually go out and study them in a scientific way. So this species, thanks to, as I mentioned earlier, the study being studied well. In that light, now Sanjay Veerakodi at my lab, looking at mostly the vocalization. This is Sanjay with his gadgets and the co-supervisors, myself and Eben. Eben did his PhD once upon a time with Professor Kotagama in Singaraja. Now he's a professor at Guangzhou University in China. So we are looking at this Crested Rango, which is also an endemic confined to the wet zone. Its closest relative, Sanjay is holding here, is a racket-tailed Rango, which is it has a much longer tail, racket-like tail, but in the wet zone, our Crested Rango, which is speciated as the process that I explained earlier, and became that racketless version, our endemic. And Sanjay studied the intermediates. There are intermediates And when you do the phylogeny, the genetic association of these or linkages, we've noticed these intermediate looking birds in across both like a tail genotype and crested genotype. This is the Crested Rango phenotype. This is the racket-tailed Rango phenotype, and the intermediates are found in across both sides. This is the greater racket-tailed Rango phenotype, and this is the Ceylon Crested Rango genotype. So these red birds are these intermediates, and for example, the birds from Daraniyagala falls into all these groups. So we know that the intermediate phenotypes are probably hybrids or has some other effects that Sanjay is looking at. One interesting group among our endemics are the babblers, because babblers, all the babblers in Sri Lanka are one way or another endemic. There's 4 species that are endemic. The full species is endemic. The brown cap babbler, this is the tiny brown cap babbler with a redidio type vocalization. And then the Sri Lanka skimitar babbler, which is endemic. Rufous babbler, this one, another very pretty bird. It has this glowing orange, which is not shown in this image, but photo, but in good light, it is really glowing. And then the shaded laughing thrush. They are all endemics. And then the rest, the ones that I haven't mentioned, the yellow-billed babbler, the dark-fronted babbler, and the thorny-bellied babbler, they are also, the subspecies is endemic. Each one of them subspecies is endemic as well. So that means Sri Lanka, the entire group of these babblers are phenotypically endemic to our country, which is a unique thing, because this is probably the only group that is entirely, the entire group is endemic. And Hiroshmal Piris, a pianist from Moratua and an undergrad just passed out, studied the evolution of vocalization within this group. And he showed that there's a strong selection induced by the environment actually creating some of this diversity. And this, as I showed you in that cartoon, you know, the environment sometimes when the gene flow is restricted can push populations to become species. I think that we think that that is what happened. And these babblers, Professor Kotagama and Eben and later Janaka Pereira had showed that they use the forest environment in a very specific way. If you go to the forest, you would think, the birds are everywhere. No, birds are not everywhere. Birds are everywhere, but they found in their specific habitat, specific location. Like, for example, thrushes and certain babblers found in the ground understory. And then some found in the sub-canopy, some found in the canopy. Yes, they sometimes come to other areas, but they are normally confined to their foraging areas within the canopy. In a vertical sense, you know, you can see the shaded babbler or laughing thrush. I kind of interchange the babbler and laughing thrush because our work now very clearly show that it's not a laughing thrush. I won't talk about it here. And then these babblers in a specific area, and then these guys like some of these endemics like red-faced malqua and crested rango in the canopy or sub-canopy, and so on. So this vertical stratification is there. Also, Eben and others had showed that they found in the horizontal axis as well. Different species use different kind of the area, or they use a certain amount of real estate of the forest for their activities. So it is very different from one species to another. So within the forest, it's like a city. Like if an alien comes to Colombo, it would say, oh, the people are everywhere. But the reality is that people from, Moratua would stay in the Moratua area. People in the coast would use the coastline more, and they have their confined areas and operations and so on. And people from the, in the some majority of Colombo, people are actually living outside Colombo and come to Colombo for work and so on. So the same patterns are seen in these endemics and these forest birds. Another student of mine studied the hills white-eye. Zosteros ceylonensis found in the mountains, as Janaka's models suggest that it is actually truly a mountain species. And this has, you know, the sulfur yellow colored ones are the oriental white-eye of the lowlands, and these dark green, olive green colored ones are the hill white-eyes of the hills. And you can see their beaks are different because they eat different things. And when Nelum Wickramasinghe is the PhD student done that, now she got her doctorate recently. She showed that our hill white-eye is the basal species of all white-eyes of the world. So it is the mother of all white-eyes of the world. The white-eyes are found in Africa, Asia, and Australia. But our hill white-eye of the mountains of Sri Lanka actually is the mother or the basal species of all white-eyes of the world. And in Sri Lanka, the lowland non-endemic Indian white-eye or the oriental white-eye and the endemic Ceylon white-eye, they don't have much genetic similarity. They were very different organisms, even though they are all both white-eyes. So this shows that Sri Lanka's own endemism. Recently, I got an email from somebody who misinterpreted and misunderstood this paper, and he was asking why this paper doesn't shows Ceylon white-eye as a separate species, but it actually shows something else. It shows that Ceylon white-eye is not closely related to oriental white-eye, and also it shows that Ceylon white-eye is the basal species of all white-eyes of the world. And through that we showed that they came in two different routes. This is called double invasion. So over the evolutionary path, they came from two different routes to Sri Lanka, not as like one Ceylon white-eye came to Sri Lanka and later evolved from it. There's oriental white-eye evolved from it. It's a different process. So sometimes, you know, this sort of high-end scientific papers get misunderstood. That's why I thought to show a little bit of science also in these slides. Not just the beauty. There's beauty in two different ways. One, the beauty of its structure, beauty of its feathers, beauty of its color, and also sometimes, and also its beauty of its past, beauty of its origins, beauty of its genetics, beauty of its molecular structures. They're all very beautiful. And worth a study. So this is another example of relatively endemic rich group, the bulbuls. We have the Kondakurulla, the commonest one in the town, which is not endemic, and also the white-browed bulbul, the Bamakaha kondea, Bamasudu kondea, which is also not endemic. But these two, the yellow-eared bulbul in the mountains and the black-capped bulbul in cross Sri Lanka, they are endemic. But you can see that in the montane one, the curved beak suggests that it eats something different from all these endemics, all these bulbuls. So the food sometimes act as a barrier, and specialized birds and also the environment forced these birds to change its beak to eat a specific type of food. As I showed you in that cartoon, you know, that will create new species. Probably this is what happened to this one. Another species that we work in the lab is the Ceylon bush wobbler. We've done some genetic sexing because normally the male and female look the same, and we showed that the red eye is the genetic males has the red eye and genetic females has a yellow eye. So it confirms that the notion that some authors have suggested that the red eye might be sexually driven, or the males has the red eye. Some authors said that it is the adult and juvenile. So, but we showed that it is not the adult or juvenile, it is the sex. And they are in the mountains. And something interesting about them is that it's considered as an iconic species where its closest relatives found in eastern China. So it is one of the most charismatic relic species, or the species that doesn't have any neighbors, relatives in the neighborhood, because most of our endemics have their closest relatives in the lowlands or in India, southern India, or in the northern India. But in this particular bird, since it's a bush wobbler, the closest relatives were considered living in the eastern China, in the eastern Asia. So we've done some molecular work, and what we shown that these are the Bradipterus. These are the Chinese Asian bush warblers. Our bush warbler is not related to the Chinese, the bush warbler, Bradipterus warblers. So far, what science done, since they thought it is closely related to these guys, they placed them there and they put it in a separate genus, Elaphonis, not Bradipterus. Earlier it was Bradipterus pallaseri, but then it was renamed as Elaphonis pallaseri because it's not a Bradipterus, but it doesn't has much affinities to these guys. So, but what we've showed with blood samples collected from adult birds and a thorough study, that they are actually nestled with the African tropical warblers, especially the grass birds. These are the grass birds and of the Shonicola. This Shonicola group, their closest relatives are the grass birds of the African grass birds of the Shonicola, not the African Bradipterus or the Far Eastern Asian Bradipterus. So with that, we now show that it's not a bush warbler, it's a grass bird. It's not a Bradipterus, it's not a Elaphonis either, because it can be most probably a Shonicola species. Its closest relative is found in India, but it is an African lineage. We have most of our birds coming from north, Indian or Chinese or Oriental region. So this is an example of an African lineage coming and colonizing in the mountains. One of the main model organisms that we work in our lab, I've done two postdocs on this, not this particular group, but on woodpeckers. And over the past 10 years, I've been extensively working on woodpecker ecology to genomics to genetics. Several of my postgraduate students are working. So Layard's flameback or the crimson back flameback, this large flameback with the ivory-like beak, and the red back flameback, which we classified as an endemic species recently, the two endemics of the group. And if you looked at the flamebacks, you can see that in the world, they are yellow. This is its range. It's an Asian group. It's all yellow except in Sri Lanka and a small part in Philippines. But in Sri Lanka, in southern Sri Lanka, all the woodpeckers are red. Flamebacks are red. Everywhere else, they are yellow. So as you can see in a more zoomed in version, there's two genera, the Chrysocolaptus or the greater flameback group and the Dinopium or the lesser flameback group. Both have their members became red in southern Sri Lanka. So something very interesting scientifically speaking. So we've studied one of my former PhD students, Saminder Fernando, studied their mating behavior, mate choice, who choose who, and then their genetic identity, phylogeny, vocalization, and then another current postgraduate student, Rashika, is studying their biochemistry and now genomics and the expression of carotenoids and associated gene regions in the genome. So this is a kind of a good model organism to study, and there's the greater flamebacks are also there as a comparison. And using all these assortment of phenotype, pigment biochemistry, vocalization, and genetics, we describe this as a new species, the red-backed woodpecker, as an endemic, which is the 34th endemic of this country, about 3 years ago. Right, I'll shift gear. I have another 5 minutes probably. Let's talk about subspecies. When you looked at the Indian subcontinent or the South Asia, you have a pattern. Sri Lanka has about 80 endemic unique subspecies in the among their 220 residents. That is nearly 1/3 of our birds that you see, species or subspecies that you see in Sri Lanka, or types that you see in different phenotypes or different color patterns and calls and all, nearly 1/3 are endemic. So that is relatively high rate of endemism, much higher than the 34 that we talk about among 250. I'm talking about 220 residents. Of 220, about 80 subspecies are endemic. Of the 220, about 34 species are endemic. So we have a much higher number, 80 plus that 34 together. So it's nearly about half of our birds are, or at least 1/3 are endemic. But 220 species, when you put subspecies into it, is about 300 or so. So when you put 80 plus 34, so it's about 1/3. And what is happening, like if you look at as a pattern, the body size getting smaller, plumage as you move from central India to Sri Lanka, plumage getting darker, beak getting longer, tail is proportionally getting shorter, and overall it's less speckled, less kind of banded. It's more like darker, smaller, kind of stouter bird. So that's a kind of general pattern. And subspecies are an interesting case as well. So the subspecies, one or two or more populations of species living in different subdivisions of the species range. Or in another way, different environments, like in that cartoon. So it's the same species, but different populations, slightly specialized to the requirements of that particular environment. And we can recognize it by color or voice or some other behavior. So that's why we call it a subspecies, not a full species. A common criteria for recognizing two distinct populations as subspecies rather than full species is the ability of them to interbreed without fitness penalty. What is this means by fitness penalty is that if they reproduce, if the offspring is not fit, then they are two species. If the offspring can survive and without have much fitness problems, then still it's a full species. That's a general criteria. But there are, in this case, the subspecies Ceylonensis, which is the Sivuruhora, and the subspecies of Paradisi, which is the Suduredihora. But the Suduredihor's young ones are like Sivuruhora. So it is not a complete separation of plumage, but it has some elements of identity. And there are other differences. The crest is slightly different in these two subspecies and so on. But this one started to show some unique phenotypic characters that probably that is actually an endemic subspecies. So in the light, we were studying the subspecies complex of Kentish plover, the Charadrius alexandrinus. Earlier it was one big species consisted of many subspecies, but over time the American forms were considered snowy plover and a full species, and then the southern Chinese and Asian, Eastern Asian population were considered Charadria dalebatus or the white-faced plover. And there are a few subspecies still there for Kentish plover, the northern breeding and African breeding alexandrinus, the Kentish plover, and the Indian breeding population over here in Sri Lanka and southern India, which called the tropical Kentish plover, or the of us Charadria seaboemi. So one of my undergraduates done extensively looked at the morphology, the wing lengths, head length measurements, beak measurements, and across Asia from Chinese coast to southern India to Sri Lanka in Mannar and Bundala, especially through our banding camps. And we looked at the morphology, vocalization, and behaviors, breeding biology. And then we studied the genetics. So when you do that, our seaboemi has a very different genetic outlook compared to the alexandrinus in the middle, this purple, and then the dalebatus orange here. So the red genotype is unique. The K3 is when you forced a program to identify the distinct elements as probable population size 3, it recognized seaboemi as a unique distinct entity, and alexandrinus as a little bit of a mix but with its own unique identity, and the dalebatus as its own identity as well. If you force the program to make it to 4 populations, still it recognizes seaboemi as a distinct population, but the mixing all goes to alexandrinus. and then Dale Bartus as another distinct identity. So, and that is population structuring, and also in the phylogeny, the Cibomi is actually the kind of it's deeper in its relationships to Dale Bartus and Alexandrinus. So Cibomi has its clear identity as a unique, distinct evolution lineage. So we are working on it to name it as a Hanuman Clover. The paper is not out yet. We are doing a kind of a broader review of the Alexandrinus complex. So these kind of things take time, and hopefully it will be out soon. And we name it Hanuman Clover because of its affinity to southern India and Sri Lanka, and the Ramas Bridge that connects India and Sri Lanka through Manna Islands and the Ramas Bridge. So Hanuman is the mythical creator of the Ramas Bridge. So and the type specimen of this species is coming from that as well. So all these actually identifies the Ramas Bridge as a very important element to this species. So we call it Hanuman Clover in that light, and Hanuman Utukodi in Tamil, and Hanuman Olivia in Sinhala. Right, I think I took slightly over an hour. So this is, yes, our 200 million year old identity, or past, sorry, and our position, at current position, our climate, our geography, and our old forest, our identity, and within it, the beauty. So I try to show you the connection of how the past and how that forms our identity. Sri Lankan identity is not just about our national heroes, not just about our crappy politicos, not just about the unruly people in the roads. Our Sri Lankan identity comes from our past, our geologic past, our movement across the Indian Ocean, our environment, our mountains, our waterfalls, our forests, our trees, our animals, our streams, our rivers, our flowers, our butterflies. They are all Sri Lankan identity. Whoever our national heroes and the dirty, old, crappy politicians are just a small subset of whatever the heroes, right? So when you talk about the beauty and identity and Sri Lankan uniqueness, all these come into play. Our food, our traditions, our Sinhala and Tamil and Muslim and our races, burger, our people in it, our religious diversity, our endemic religions, our First Nations, Vedda people, they are all part of our identity. But not just, that is not only our identity. Our identity consisted of all these elements. With that, I will end. As I mentioned, there's a lot of people, students involved, my postgraduate students, current and past, collaborators, foreign collaborators like Eben and Liz and Yang and Darren, and local collaborators like both former and current, and postgraduate students. Some are now abroad, some are ready to go, and some are still studying. Undergraduates, my lab, and then our molecular ecology and evolution lab at the Department of Zoology and Environmental Sciences, and then foreign collaborative universities, wildlife department and forest department, and then the local donors like Mr. Nyanam and Palmyra House, and supporters, our friends, they're all part of this. And also my family, my wife, she is also a scientist. She supports me all the time behind the scene as a biochemist and a reviewer of my manuscripts and all. And then I have our little Tomian, comes with me to explore the world. And yeah, with that, I thank everybody. So I am the spokesperson of many these studies, and many of their long hours of work. And Over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you, sir, for that awesome lecture. So we have a lot of questions, so we'll try and answer as many as possible.
Yeah,
So the first question is, why
Jonathan,
aren't
give me a
there?
second. I'll just
Oh, sorry.
Jonathan, can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes, I can hear you now, sir.
All right. Great. Okay. Yes.
The first question is, why aren't there endemic raptors like harriers, kites, and eagles in Sri Lanka?
Give me a second. I'll just switch this off. Stop sharing. Okay. Why aren't there endemic raptors? That's a good one. Why? I okay. I think the reason behind it. There's 2 or 3 reasons behind it. I think the main reason probably would be that most raptors are good flyers, and so they fly longer distances, long ranges. So the gap between Sri Lanka and India is not that deep for a raptor. So that's one main reason. But then you have forest raptors like mountain hawk eagle, legs buzzer, and then crested goshawk. So those are normally forest raptors. They have longer tails and shorter wings. Why they are not endemic? Probably partly we haven't looked carefully. So that is always there. So those who are keen on animals and wanted to study them, I encourage, go beyond just simple birding, go into that, look deep, look for new tools. Your bino might or might not be the only tool. Your camera may not be the only tool. Sharing a pretty picture is not the end, right? It's the beginning. Okay, so if you do that, maybe there are, like, for example, legs was a species that can be an endemic. Legs hawk eagle is a regional endemic already, the mountain hawk eagle. So that's there. It's very difficult to study. That's where the problem. We are few in numbers, and they are very confined in their kind of secretive lives. So I won't rule them out as potential future endemics, but normally they move around more. So the chances of them getting isolated is less.
Yeah. That brings us to the second question. So you said that the number of endemic birds is debatable. Could you explain what you meant by that? And also, are there more endemic birds to be discovered? And also another question that is tied to that: what is the most accurate number? What's the most accurate number of endemics?
Yeah, I would say I'll answer the last question first.
Yeah.
So to me, 34. I would go by 34 because 34 will include scaly thrush or Sri Lanka thrush, and also and then the 33 that they were talking about. So 34 is it's, I think, in my opinion, the kind of a conservative number. Why the numbers change? Because there are, like, basically anybody can come up with their own number. Because the criteria of what is a species and what is not a species is debatable, and also there are, most of these, unfortunately, very few species of endemics has any scientific publications done based on them. So it's mostly comes from kind of opinion. So it's your opinion, like somebody's opinion, whether this species is not found in India or not. Or the problem is that there's a closely related ones found in India. So it's like, that in that cartoon, would the Wildlife Society group considered as a very special entity compared to those who never go to the forest, or they are the same? So it's a debatable thing. They would have slightly different opinion, they would have slightly different viewpoints about life, but is that good enough? So that same problem in a slightly different way applies to this question debate. Would a slightly different group of birds found in India and a similar group found in Sri Lanka, are they the same or different? Are they just subspecies, 2 subspecies of the same species, or completely different 2 species, one endemic to Sri Lanka and one endemic to India? So that question is highly debatable. The unfortunate thing about this debate is that there's very few studies actually rule these things out. So, like, what I do in my lab at the University of Colombo, what we try to do, we try to go to these debatable areas and try to resolve it using assortment of tools like morphology, vocalization, breeding ecology, genetics, genomics, biochemistry, and so on. So unless you do that, these numbers will continue to change. So that's what we try to do. But unfortunately, it has not been done that way for the past 50 years or so. So that is the idea. So that's why the numbers change. But with scientific backing, with actual publications coming in, the international, this list would recognize our species as our unique identity. So, by doing this sort of science, you can actually contribute to Sri Lankan national heritage. Because, we as Sri Lankans or scientists from this country has to do that by ourselves, because otherwise in the international international table, for them it's just another population. So unless there's enough grounds, they would say, okay, I mean, it's the South India and Sri Lanka, what's a big deal? But for us, it's a big deal, right? It's Sri Lanka, it's not South India. So we have to fight through, and we have to show the evidence whether our species are unique. Because for example, in amphibian world, Professor Madhava Migas Kumbura, Dr. Rohan Pettiyakoda, they've done that. Even the fish world, ichthyology world, they've done that well. So they showed how unique our fish, our amphibians, and then the Mendis and their group, Ruchira Somavira, Kuela, they in reptiles, they showed. And then recently with the Hunas, the day geckos, the scientists in those areas actually showed how unique our diversity is. But in bird world, I think now it is happening. So it will take few more years to finish.
Thank you, sir. The next question is, do species, now say for example, sir, we take the Ceylon white-eye and Oriental white-eye. So in places where these distributions overlap, so do they interbreed? Like even if you take the Greater Racket-tailed Drongo and the Sri Lanka Drongo?
Sometimes they do. Like Drongos, probably they do. In woodpeckers, the red-backed woodpecker and golden-backed woodpecker, they certainly do. But in white eyes, what we showed that they don't. So there's no intermediates. So because they are very different in terms of their genetic makeup, they are not close related. Like if you are, if in a species level, if you are recently separated, you have the capacity to have viable offspring and hybrids. But as you move away, your chances of hybridization is less and less and less, to a point at one point you don't see any hybrids at all. So for some species, yes. Drongos, yes. Woodpeckers, certainly yes. But in the in the Layard's flameback or the crimson-backed flameback, there's no opportunity because its closest relatives are not found in Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
So since our greater flameback, or our greater flameback, which is the Layard flameback, is a forest bird, it won't fly through Rama's Bridge into India. So that means that they don't have the opportunity. So because of that, its endemic status is secured. But our red-backed woodpecker can fly because it's an open country species. So it actually can do that. And I think they've done that over the years. So there is genetic mixing. But the hybrids are less viable. They have inferior genetic fitness qualities. So they they die soon. So because of that, our endemics, the red-backed woodpecker's identity is retained. So it's a complex thing, but that's how it works.
So the next question is, so it was, I think, Vincent Legg who had observed chestnut by Towelette in Mount Lavinia. Are these rare birds still found in the suburbs of Colombo? Can they be found?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, there were reports of red-faced Malkoha in Kotte. There were, those were like anecdotal records. And then, and there were strong written records of Crested Rango in Kotte. The unfortunate thing about this is that till early 1930s, there was a forest patch in Kotte and later it got cleared for to make a residential area. So that was the last rainforest patch in the Colombo township. And in 1930s, they cleared it. So, and you would think, you and then what this government, the previous government, the government before that done, they all clear this very unique diversity for like Miris Watu, Artapal Watu, and you go to Nuareli area, they are getting cleared every day. And Sri Lanka has highest rate of deforestation in Asia right now, because of the government policies. So you would think, 1930s, I would not let this forest patch to get cleared. We will all fight for it. But it is happening now, and very few people are fighting. So it is happening. It is so these unfortunate planning, when the forest is gone, it's gone. So that is, I mean, somebody would ask, so what's the big deal of having Crested Rango or red-faced malpa in Kotte? I mean, Kotte, would people die? People won't die right away, but when you continue to happen, tourists won't come to Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka won't have our identity. We will eventually have a whole bunch of corrupt people as our national heroes, and that would be it. And then we were just another kind of wasted kind of a place in like some of the African countries we don't talk about, right? In some of the countries we don't hear. But if you go to international community, Sri Lanka is a place where anybody would know, everybody knows, as a tropical paradise. Why? Because of our identity, because of our diversity, and we earn a lot from it through tourism and other means, and we can earn more in the future. And more. So that itself a reason to not to do such kind of idiotic, stupid things in the future. So yes, Colombo has Spur Fowl, suburbs of Western Province or Colombo district. When you travel along the high level road, you pass Mipe in the Colombo district side. You still have Spur Fowl, you still have green-billed Kukal, you still have Rufous Babbler, you still have, in the Colombo Gardens, you have the red-backed woodpecker, you have lorikeet, you have the Ceylon green pigeon, we have Ceylon swallow or Sri Lanka swallow. So we have about 10 endemic species still in St. Thomas's College, premises. You have at least 6 endemics. Off the head, I could say lorikeet, red-backed woodpecker, Ceylon green pigeon. Now 3. The 4th one is I'm pretty sure the barbet, the red, crimson fronted barbet. That's now 4. And I could come up with, if I think a little bit harder, another 2. So there's about 6 endemics in the SCC property premises. So it's still diversity is there. It's just you have to maintain large trees and patches of your home garden. Each home garden, if it supports some life, together there's about thousands and thousands of home gardens in Colombo, and that will sustain life. Yeah.
So the next question is, what's the most accurate way of describing new species? Is it morphology or using molecular phylogeny?
I don't think there's one superior over the other. I would say morphology is superior over molecular in a way, because morphology is important, or especially phenotype. I'm not telling it as morphology. Morphology means plumage for birds, plumage, the shape and size of beak and wings and tails and legs and so on, right? And that is, I think, superior, because that's how a bird would recognize another bird.
Yeah.
So in that way, it's superior. And also calls or vocalization is very important, because most birds are highly vocal. So that is important, another feature. And then molecular phylogeny is important, because some species look similar simply because they are in the same habitat or similar habitats. It doesn't mean that their origins are the same. And known simple example is that a dolphin, a mammal, a fish, a shark is a fish, and a tuna is another type of fish. And then you have seahorses. They all look like fish. But why? Because they live in the ocean, but they are not related. by any means. So the same phenomena goes into a forest or a particular microhabitat, like a small, like a shrubbery in Singaraja would have one species, and a similar shrubbery in say Western Ghats or in Himalayas would create the same conditions which makes the inhabitants of that small shrub looks the same, but it doesn't, may or may not be the same, their ancestors may or may not be the same. So in that light, molecular tools would be helpful. So the solution to this is that is the integrative phylogeny or integrative taxonomy. Sorry, integrative taxonomy means, Jonathan, it's the use of molecular, vocal, morphology, and other phenotypic traits onto onto one table and look carefully. So that way you can get a like a more, you know, what would the animal would look like you know, would the animal can identify this change, would this represent like genetic similarity or difference, and so on. So that way, so it is the most powerful tool by using an assortment of you know, tools. So that's the way forward. That's what most modern taxonomies do. The integrative taxonomy, like most of the things that I mentioned here, also has that element here.
Another question, sir, is what is the most evolutionary distinct species in Sri Lanka? Like, endemic.
The most evolutionary distinct species in Sri Lanka is a frogmouth.
Okay.
Number one ranked species is frogmouth.
Okay.
It has the highest evolutionary distinctiveness. The second most evolutionary distinct species is the trogon, Malabar trogon. Both of them looks very ancient. Like if you've seen them, you know, they look like more like you know, reptiles. So that's easy. And then not so easy. Fourth and fifth ones are kind of tricky. Pelican is a one in the mix of. I'm talking about the top 10 evolutionary distinct species. Another kind of odd one is the Indian pitta, which is a migrant, but you know, anyway, so basically the evolutionary distinct species means that they don't have that many individuals representing their genetic or evolutionary heritage. For example, frogmouth, you can all see that its closest relatives are in the Eastern Asia, and very few species across the globe, and they are very old. So the idea is that if you lose an evolutionary distinct species, you will lose a big component of its past. For example, in mammals, it's easier to explain. If you lose a deer, like say if you lose spotted deer in this country, what would happen? Yes, you can't show like to your grandchildren in another 30 years down the road. If you lose spotted deer, would be able to, we can show samba deer as an example. You know, this පුතේ මෙන්න මේ වගේ මුවෙක් වගේ එකෙක් හිටියා කියලා. The spotted samba deer would be small, bigger, but spotted deer is smaller but has spots. If you lose a fishing cat, you can say that, or you can show jungle cat as an example as a size, and leopard as an example of the pattern for the future generations. But if you lose the elephant, would you be able to show a buffalo and say me puti අර වගේ මේ එකෙක් ඊටවඩා ටිකක් ලොකු එකෙක් හිටියා ඉස්සර කියලා? No, it doesn't. Podiga would it has a huge horns daddy, the granddaddy කියලා, you know? So you can't, so if you lose an elephant, there's no example to show. So that is what it is. So elephants has a much higher evolutionary distinctive value than a deer or a leopard, because the leopard has a much lower evolutionary distinctive value because of the other cats in Sri Lanka, something like that. So in that light, among mammals in Sri Lanka, the dugong has the highest evolutionary distinctive value. Because if it loses, there's no other similar like thing, right? Okay, that's how it works.
So I think we'll have one more question. The last question is, I'll actually put two questions together. What do you think the rarest endemic bird is, and what is the best place to find endemic birds if you're a bird watcher?
I'll answer the last one first. The best place to see endemics. Any rainforest is better over other places. So in that light, Singaraja, especially the Kudava side, and Kanneliya, the tarred road, paved road along Kanneliya, and then the Horton Plains. Those are easier places to see many endemics. In the forest, the edge is better than the deep inside, because most people would, most animals would come to the edge for foraging. So in Singaraja, Kudava village, in Kitulgala, the Kitulgala village, just kissing the forest kind of a area is interesting. In Horton, you don't have that thing, but around Horton, the roads it's an open country kind of place. So Horton Plains, those I would say Kitulgala, Singaraja, and Horton is the top, and then Peak Wilderness and other places where you can walk would be good. That's one. And the early mornings has to be there. Like you have to start 5:30 in the morning. That's a golden rule. So if you go after 8, you see very few. So when you go, you have to go to places where you can actually start birding or nature watching by 6 o'clock. Like if the ticketing office opens 8 o'clock, you do not go to that place, such places. That is for people who not for bird watchers. And then for the question of what is the rarest endemic, that's a tough one. I would think that what would be the rarest? All the mountain endemics are relatively rare. I think because some birds, you see few like Serendip scops owl and white-faced starling.
Yeah.
So those were to me probably rarer than others. Aranga is rare, but I think in few numbers you can see them in a much broader area. But I think Aranga probably has fewer numbers than any other endemic in this country, even though Serendip and starlings are harder to see. But anyway, it's a questionable. It's a thing. In their microhabitats, all these birds are common. That's the thing. So if you know the right microhabitat, then you can see them.
So that brings us to the end of yet another very successful and knowledge-filled webinar. We cordially like to thank Dr. Sampath Seneviratne for spending his valuable time to impart his vast knowledge and enlighten all of us on the endemic birds of Sri Lanka. We are humbled and extremely honored to have had him speak to us today. I hope that everyone joining gained much knowledge from Dr. Sampath's awesome lecture. I would now like to thank DEMO and Jeep Sri Lanka for sponsoring this webinar. We are extremely grateful for their support and generous contribution towards this event. We couldn't have done it without them. We would also like to thank the ICT Society who have worked tirelessly this last week to make the live stream possible. They played an important role in the success of this webinar. I'm told by Dr. Sampath that a few officials of the Wilpattu National Park have joined our webinar. We would like to also thank them for joining. And last but not least, I would like to thank the audience for participating in this event. We hope that you enjoyed today's session. We'll be conducting many more webinars in the future, so stay tuned for more. Stay safe and God bless you all. Thank you for joining.
Okay, thank you very much again.